War isn't always about guns, tanks, and bravery. Sometimes, it's about the dirtiest tricks imaginable: bullets that explode in the shooter's hands, soldiers disguised as the enemy, swamps turned into electric death traps, and even cats used as shields in battle. These weren't accidents, they were carefully planned strategies that changed history. Today, we uncover the darkest, most ruthless tricks ever used in war. War is often described as chaos, but throughout history, there has been one constant: soldiers and commanders will do anything to win. A well-known military saying goes, "The best fight is an unfair one." And on the battlefield, gaining an edge often means resorting to deception, trickery, and ruthless tactics that push the boundaries of morality. Today, we're diving into some of the dirtiest tricks ever used in warfare, tactics so underhanded and shocking that they've gone down in history for their audacity. The Vietnam War is infamous for its use of booby traps, punji stakes, tripwires, and hidden explosives set by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army. These crude but effective traps terrified US and Allied soldiers. But few realized that the Americans themselves turned to equally underhanded tactics. In 1967, Colonel John Singlaub of the Secretive Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, Studies and Observations Group, MISIVSOG, came up with a new idea. Instead of blowing up enemy ammo dumps, what if they sabotaged the ammunition itself? This became Project Eldest Son. Thousands of AK-47 rounds, machine gun cartridges, and mortar shells were carefully tampered with. The normal gunpowder was replaced with a powerful explosive that caused chamber pressures to skyrocket from 45,000 psi to over 250,000. Firing one of these rounds would literally destroy the weapon and the soldier using it. The trick was in the delivery. SOG operatives would sneak behind enemy lines and plant just a handful of sabotaged rounds among normal ammunition, sometimes leaving them in caches, sometimes slipping them into the pouches of dead Viet Cong fighters. Too many planted rounds would raise suspicion. Just one or two, however, would go unnoticed, until it was too late. To make the scheme even more effective, the CIA spread rumors about defective Chinese-made weapons. Fake documents circulated, and even armed forces radio broadcast warnings not to use captured enemy rifles because they might explode. The true aim wasn't necessarily to kill enemy soldiers, but to undermine trust between the North Vietnamese and their Chinese suppliers. At the dawn of the 20th century, Britain and Russia were locked in the so-called Great Game, a struggle for control over Central Asia. Tibet, poor and isolated, suddenly found itself in the middle of this geopolitical rivalry. Rumors spread that Tibet was aligning with Russia, sparking fears in British India that a Russian army might one day march through the Himalayas. In 1903, Lord Curzon, the Viceroy of India, authorized an expedition into Tibet. Officially, it was diplomatic. In reality, it was an invasion. General Francis Younghusband led around 3,000 troops, including British soldiers, Gurkhas, and Sikhs, equipped with modern rifles, machine guns, and artillery. The Tibetans, meanwhile, carried swords, clubs, and ancient matchlock muskets. When the British reached the village of Guru in March 1904, they encountered a blockade of 3,000 Tibetans. Accounts differ, but some reports claim the Tibetans were convinced to douse the burning cords on their muskets during negotiations. With the enemy disarmed, Younghusband gave the order to fire. What followed was a massacre, later called the Massacre of Chamikshenko. Around 700 Tibetans were killed in minutes. The British suffered just a handful of wounded. The campaign continued in much the same way. Within months, Tibet was forced into a humiliating treaty, ceding land and paying indemnities. This was imperialism at its dirtiest, using a flimsy excuse, overwhelming firepower, and outright deceit to crush a vastly weaker opponent. They wore stolen US uniforms, drove captured jeeps, and even tried disguising German tanks as American Shermans. Their orders: sabotage, spread false commands, change road signs, and cause chaos. And it worked, sort of. American troops became paranoid. Checkpoints sprang up everywhere, and soldiers were grilled with questions only an American would know: state capitals, baseball trivia, even movie stars. One general was detained for half an hour after failing to answer a question about the Chicago Cubs. The rumors grew wild that Skorzeny's men planned to assassinate Eisenhower himself. For days, the Allied command was thrown into confusion. In truth, Operation Greif had only limited success. Most of the disguised Germans were captured, and the overall Ardennes offensive failed. But the panic it caused was proof that sometimes fear itself is the most powerful weapon. Fast forward to the brutal Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s. Both sides had suffered horrific casualties, and the war was locked in stalemate. In 1984, Iran launched Operation Khaybar, a daring assault through the flooded marshlands of southern Iraq. Using speedboats, Iranian troops attempted to seize Majnoon Island. Iraqi tanks couldn't maneuver in the swamps, but Saddam Hussein's forces had other tricks up their sleeves. One Iraqi officer proudly showed journalists the secret: miles of electrical cables running from generators into the marsh water. When Iranian soldiers jumped from their boats and waded through chest-deep water, the Iraqis flipped a switch. Electricity surged through the swamp. Hundreds of men were instantly electrocuted, fried like eggplants, as the officer boasted. Their bodies floated to the surface, later shown on Iraqi state television as a grim warning. Some reports, impossible to fully confirm, even claimed the corpses were stacked into makeshift roads to allow tanks to cross the muddy ground. Iran ultimately captured parts of the marshes, but at staggering cost. It was a Pyrrhic victory, bought with thousands of lives, and one of the dirtiest tricks of modern war. Dirty tricks aren't limited to modern times. Over 2,500 years ago, during Persia's invasion of Egypt, one battle was decided by a tactic so strange it borders on unbelievable. The Persian king Cambyses II faced the Egyptians at Pelusium. Knowing how deeply Egyptians revered animals, especially cats, sacred to the goddess Batet, he used it against them. Persian soldiers marched into battle carrying cats, dogs, ibises, and other sacred animals in front of their lines. Some even painted cats on their shields. The Egyptians, terrified of killing the sacred creatures and invoking divine wrath, held back. Their hesitation cost them the battle. Persian forces crushed the Egyptians, captured their pharaoh, and brought Egypt under Persian rule. Whether every detail is true or exaggerated by ancient historians, the lesson remains: even in antiquity, psychological warfare could decide the fate of empires. From sabotaged bullets to massacres, from disguised commandos to electrified swamps and even sacred cats, war has always been filled with dirty tricks. These tactics may seem dishonorable, but they remind us of a brutal truth: in war, victory often goes not to the strongest, but to the most cunning.